We went to Columbia, South Carolina. Got to the auditorium. Now, this is with the Classic Five, David, Eddie, Paul, Melvin, and myself.
By the time Otis Williams reached his 80s, he was carrying more than memories. He was carrying names: Al, Paul, Eddie, Melvin, and David Ruffin, the man whose voice made strangers stop and listen. David did not enter the Temptations quietly. He brought fire, pain, charm, and a sound that made Motown feel bigger. But the brighter he burned, the harder it became for Otis to hold the group together. The applause was loud, but backstage, the warning signs were louder. Missed shows, broken trust, old wounds, a talent too big to ignore, and a struggle too deep to hide. Join us as we look back at Otis Williams, David Ruffin, and the heartbreaking truth behind the voice Motown never forgot, and the loss he never fully escaped. The boy from Texarkana who had to start over. He was born Otis Miles Jr. on October 30th, 1941 in Texarkana, Texas. His parents were Otis Miles and Hazel Louise Williams, but their family life changed almost as soon as it started. His mother and father separated shortly after his birth, and while Otis was still a toddler, Hazel remarried and moved to Detroit, Michigan. That left young Otis back in Texarkana, being raised by both of his grandmothers. For a child, that kind of start can leave a mark. You grow up with love around you, but also with questions. You wonder where you belong. You wonder why life feels split in two. Otis had that kind of childhood. He had people caring for him, but his mother was building another life in another city. In a strange way, that early split would follow him for years. He had roots in Texas, but his future was waiting in Detroit. Then, when he was 10 years old, Hazel brought him to Detroit to live with her and his stepfather. That move changed everything. Detroit was not just a new city. It was a new world. It was louder, faster, and full of young voices trying to be heard. Otis was still a boy, but the city gave him something he had not fully known before: a path. He did not arrive as a star. He arrived as a boy trying to find his place. But once Detroit opened its doors, music gave him a reason to start building something of his own. The city that turned Otis into a dreamer. As Otis became a teenager, music started pulling him in a serious way. He was not just singing for fun anymore. He was trying to build something. That was when Otis Miles Jr. began using his mother's maiden name and became Otis Williams on stage. It was a small change, but it gave him a new identity. He started forming groups, testing sounds, and looking for the right mix of voices. First came Otis Williams and the Siberians. Then came the El Domingos. Then came the Distance. None of these groups were famous yet, but each one moved him closer to the dream. In 1959, the Distance got a local hit called Come On, with lead vocals by Richard Street. Otis helped write it with producer Johnny May Matthews and manager Milton Jenkins. For a moment, it felt like the door was opening, but later recordings did not hit the same way. That is the painful side of early fame. One song can make people notice you, but it does not promise anything after that. Then Berry Gordy of Motown Records made an offer. Otis, Al Bryant, and Melvin Franklin moved forward, while Pee Wee Crawford and Richard Street left the Distance. That could have ended the dream for some people, but Otis kept moving. Soon, Eddie Kendricks and Paul Williams from the Primes joined Otis, Bryant, and Franklin. Together, they became the Elgins. The voices were there. The ambition was there. But they still needed the name, the sound, and the moment that would turn a Detroit group into history. The Temptations became bigger than a singing group. In March 1961, the Elgins signed with Motown, but almost right away, They had to change their name because another group was already using it. So they became the Temptations, a name that would soon mean something much bigger than 5 young men chasing a dream. At first, they were still trying to prove themselves, but Motown knew how to shape talent. The group became known for smooth steps, sharp suits, tight harmonies, and a style that made them look like one clean unit. They did not move like 5 men fighting for the spotlight. They moved like a group that had been built to last. Over time, the Temptations became one of Motown's greatest acts. Their songs helped shape soul music, and later, with producer Norman Whitfield, records like Cloud 9 pushed them into a bold new sound. They sold tens of millions of albums, won 4 Grammy Awards, and gave the world classics like My Girl and I Know I'm Losing You. But inside all that success, Otis Williams had a different role. He rarely sang lead. He was the leader, the organizer, and the steady baritone in the middle. He could sing tenor and baritone, but most of the time, his job was to keep the group moving. He had rare lead moments, and he also added spoken parts to songs like I'm Gonna Make You Love Me and Masterpiece. Otis was not always the voice fans screamed for, but he became one of the most important men in the group. While others stood in front, he helped hold the whole thing together. And before David Ruffin ever walked in, Otis had already learned how quickly one troubled member could shake the whole group. The first crack came before David Ruffin. The Temptations looked smooth from the outside, but the inside was never that simple. Otis had to guide a group filled with huge voices, strong personalities, and private pain. That became clear even before David Ruffin entered the picture. Original member Al Bryant was part of the early lineup, but his behavior became harder to manage. According to Otis in his book Temptations, the drinking changed him. Otis wrote, "Trouble was that on top of the drinking, Al developed a bad attitude." In 1963, Al attacked Paul Williams with a beer bottle after a show. Paul convinced the others not to fire him then, but the trouble did not stop. Later that year, after another scene at Motown's Christmas party, the group finally let him go. It was a hard decision, but it opened the door for someone else. Years later, Otis saw Al again after a show at Detroit's Cobo Hall. He looked worn down, with long, unruly hair, dark circles, and skin that Otis described as the color of ash. Otis sensed a deep sadness in him. Al died in 1975 from cirrhosis of the liver. That loss showed Otis something painful early on. Leaving the group could break a man, and sometimes the stage was the only place some men felt whole. Still, the Temptations had to keep moving. They needed a replacement. They needed a new voice. And the singer who stepped in after Al would bring them higher than ever before, while also bringing a storm none of them could fully control. The gospel boy who carried a heavy past. David Ruffin's story began in Wynot, Mississippi, where he was born Davis Eli Ruffin on January 18, 1941. He was the third-born son of Elias Eli Ruffin, a Baptist minister, and Ophelia Ruffin. He had siblings named Quincy, Rita Mae, Jimmy Lee, and a sister named Rosine, who died in infancy. His family had deep roots in Mississippi, with a history that reached back through Alabama and North Carolina. One of his ancestors, John Ruffin, had served in the Civil War with the 14th United States Colored Heavy Artillery Regiment. But David's own childhood was not soft. His mother died from childbirth complications only 10 months after he was born. His father later married Earlene, a schoolteacher, but home life stayed difficult. His father was strict and at times violently abusive. Still, music was all around him. As a child, David traveled with his siblings and his father and stepmother as a family gospel group. They opened shows for Mahalia Jackson and the Five Blind Boys of Mississippi. He sang in church at Mount Salem Methodist Church, at talent shows, and anywhere he could lift his voice. At 14, he left home with minister Eddie Bush and went to Memphis, first with thoughts of ministry. By 15, he was in Hot Springs, Arkansas, performing with jazz musician Phineas Newborn Sr. He sang at talent shows, worked with horses, joined the Dixie Nightingales, and even sang briefly with the Soul Stirrers. But like Sam Cooke and Jackie Wilson, two of his idols, David soon moved away from gospel toward secular music. That choice carried him toward Detroit, where fate was already waiting. Before Motown knew him, David Ruffin was hungry. When David arrived in Detroit with Eddie Bush and his wife, he was young, hungry, and still trying to find the right door. His brother Jimmy was already there, working at the Ford Motor Company while chasing music. David recorded You and I and Believe Me in 1958 under the name Little David Bush. The songs came out on Vega Records, but they did not make him famous. Still, Detroit kept putting him near the right people. In 1957, he met Berry Gordy Jr., who was still a songwriter with big plans. David lived with Gordy's father and helped him do construction work on the building that would become Hitsville, USA. Imagine that. Before Motown became a music landmark, David Ruffin had a hand in the walls. He also worked near Marvin Gaye at Anna Records, the label run by Gwen Gordy Fuqua and Billy Davis. Gwen later remembered him as polite, saying he was very much a gentleman, yes ma'am and no ma'am. But what impressed her most was how he rehearsed like he was already on stage. David packed records, sang, played drums, and worked with the Voice Masters, a doo-wop style group that included future Motown talent like Lamont Dozier and members connected to the originals. He recorded for Anna Records too, but those early solo efforts did not take off. The talent was there, the hunger was there, the voice was there. The break just had not arrived yet, and it would come through a group already trying to survive its first real shakeup. The sleeping giant finally steps in. David's way into the Temptations came through his brother Jimmy. Jimmy had toured with the group on the Motown Review and told David they needed a tenor. David already lived close to Otis Williams in Detroit, so he let Otis know he was interested. In January 1964, after Al Bryant was fired, David became a temptation. His first recording session with the group came on January 9, 1964. Both David and Jimmy had been considered, but David had an edge because of his stage presence. He had performed with the group at Motown's New Year's Eve party in 1963, and that moment helped seal it. At first, David was not the clear star. He wore his famous glasses and sang mostly background. Eddie Kendricks and Paul Williams still handled much of the lead work. David did get a few lead parts on stage and in the studio, but some early studio leads were not released for over a year because they were not seen as strong enough. That sounds strange now, because David would become one of Motown's most powerful voices. But Smokey Robinson saw something others had not fully used yet. He called David a sleeping giant. Smokey heard a voice that was both mellow and gruff. He believed the right song could turn that voice into a smash. It had to be something David could belt out, but it also had to stay sweet and melodic. That was the challenge. David did not need just any song. He needed the song that could unlock him. And once Smokey found it, the Temptations' whole story changed. The moment David Ruffin took over the room. That perfect song became My Girl. It was recorded in November 1964 and released the next month. In 1965, it became the Temptations' first #1 single, and nothing was the same after that. My Girl did not just give the group a hit, it gave them a signature. It also lifted David Ruffin into the role of lead singer and frontman. After that, the hits kept coming. David led songs like It's Growing, Since I Lost My Baby, Ain't Too Proud to Beg, Beauty is Only Skin Deep, I Know I'm Losing You, All I Need, Loneliness Made Me Realize, It's You That I Need, I Wish It Would Rain, and I Could Never Love Another After Loving You. He also shared lead vocals with Eddie Kendricks on You're My Everything. David stood 6'3", and on stage he looked larger than life. He could make a love song sound like a confession. He did not just sing sadness. He made people feel it in their chest. Otis later remembered that the group playfully called him Ruff. At first, David was a natural comedian and a hard-working singer. He also gave the group one of its most famous stage tools, the four-headed microphone stand. That stand let the others move and dance without crowding one microphone, while the lead singer worked his own microphone. It looked simple, but it helped shape the Temptations' stage image. David was not just singing the show, he was shaping it. And for a while, that made him feel impossible to replace. The voice got louder, but so did the problems. By 1967, the same gift that lifted David began creating problems around him. The Temptations were growing bigger, and David's place in the group was changing fast. He had fans watching him, songs built around his voice, and a frontman image that was hard to ignore. But inside a group, one person becoming too large can make the balance shake. David began using cocaine, and the problem started touching the work. He missed rehearsals, meetings, and performances. He also stopped traveling with the other Temptations. Instead, he and Tammy Terrell rode in a custom limo with his black-rimmed glasses painted on the door. His relationship with Tammy had its own pain, too. They began dating after she joined the Motown Revue opening for the Temptations, but the relationship became troubled. He surprised her with a marriage proposal, yet she later learned he was already married. As his drug use worsened, the relationship grew more violent, and Tammy ended it after he hit her in the head with a motorcycle helmet in 1967. Tammy had suffered migraines since childhood, but later told Ebony that her emotional state during that relationship may have added to her headaches. Around that same time, Motown changed the Supremes' name to Diana Ross and the Supremes. David wanted the same kind of spotlight. He pushed for the group to be called David Ruffin and the Temptations. That caused serious tension with Otis, who was the group's de facto leader. David also began asking questions about the group's money and wanted an accounting. That brought friction with Berry Gordy, too. The music still sounded beautiful, but behind the scenes, trust was breaking into pieces. David Ruffin's exit turned into a public showdown. In June 1968, the group felt David had crossed the line. He missed a June 22nd show in Cleveland, Ohio, so he could attend a performance by his new girlfriend, Barbara Gail Martin, the daughter of Dean Martin. 5 days later, on June 27th, the Temptations officially fired him. The next day, Dennis Edwards, a former member of the Contours, was hired to replace him. At first, David seemed to accept it. Dennis was his friend, and David even encouraged him to take the spot. But that peace did not last. At Dennis Edwards' official debut with the group in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, on July 7th, David showed up, walked on stage, took the microphone, sang lead on Ain't Too Proud to Beg, and vanished as quickly as he arrived. He did it again during the July tour. Even extra security could not always keep him out. When the group sang a David-era song like My Girl, he would appear and steal the show. The fans loved it, but the group was embarrassed. Dennis later said the crowd reaction and David's pleas made the others think about giving him another chance. Otis always denied that they seriously planned to rehire him. Either way, when David showed up late for what was supposed to be his return in Gaithersburg, Maryland, the group kept Dennis and moved on. After that, David stopped disrupting their shows and focused his fight on Motown. In October 1968, he sued the label, asking for release and an accounting of his money. Motown countersued, and the case was later settled. David had to remain with Motown as a solo artist. That separate solo contract had always made his position different from the rest of the group, and some people felt it added to the fighting. The group had moved on, but the wound was still open. Outside the Temptations, David kept fighting himself. David's first solo single, My Whole World Ended the Moment You Left Me, had actually been meant for the Temptations. Released in 1969, it proved David still had power outside the group. His album, My Whole World Ended, and later Feelin' Good, kept his name alive. In 1970, he also recorded I Am My Brother's Keeper with his brother Jimmy, giving them minor hits like When My Love Hand Comes Tumbling Down and Your Love Was Worth Waiting For. But promise is not the same as peace. David's solo career looked bright for a while, yet his cocaine addiction and weaker support from Motown kept pulling him down. His personal life was also complicated. He had married Sandra Barnes in 1961, and they had 3 daughters, Cheryl, Nedra, and Kimberly. He also had a son with his long-term girlfriend, Jenna Sapia, whom he met in 1964. In 1976, David married Joy Hamilton. After his death, Jenna added Ruffin to her last name as a tribute to their relationship and for continuity with their son. By 1977, David left Motown after years of trying to prove he could stand on his own name. He was not forgotten, but the music world had changed, and the support he once had was no longer the same. He recorded for Warner Brothers with So Soon We Change and Gentleman Ruffin, then later signed with RCA. He also reconnected with Eddie Kendrick, who had his own problems with the Temptations. The two men shared history, pain, and pride. Eddie also felt pushed aside, so David was not just an old bandmate to him. He was proof that leaving the group did not always mean the story was over, but by then, the road behind them was already heavy, and the group they once helped lift was fighting its own private battles. The Temptations kept winning while falling apart. While David struggled outside the group, the Temptations were changing too. Paul Williams was fighting sickle cell disease, depression, and alcoholism. Otis later said Paul had never drank anything stronger than milk before, which made the change even harder to watch. His health declined so badly that Richard Street, Otis's old friend from the distance, was hired to help cover for him. Sometimes Paul danced and lip-synced while Richard sang off stage behind a curtain. At other shows, Richard took his place completely. Eddie Kendricks also became distant after David's firing, and as Paul's health worsened. He fought with Otis and Melvin Franklin, disliked the newer psychedelic soul direction, and stayed close to David. Eddie pushed for Ruffin to return and believed the group's money needed a full accounting. In 1970, he wanted the Temptations to go on strike until Berry Gordy and Motown opened the finances to independent accountants. Otis and Melvin opposed that. After a Copacabana clash in November 1970, Eddie walked out between shows and never came back. His last single with the group, Just My Imagination, became a #1 hit in 1971, after he had already moved toward a solo deal. Then, Paul left in May 1971 for medical reasons and died in 1973 from a gunshot wound ruled suicide. The Brotherhood was breaking. New members came and went. Ricky Owens briefly replaced Eddie. but only lasted 3 dates before being fired for forgetting words because of nerves. Richard Street officially replaced Paul. The Temptations kept performing, but the classic lineup was fading one painful piece at a time. One last return could not fix the damage. In 1982, David Ruffin and Eddie Kendricks returned to the Temptations for the reunion album and tour. For fans, it must have felt like a dream. The old voices were back, and the album included the R&B hit Standing on the Top with Rick James. But the reunion could not escape the old problems. David began missing shows again because of cocaine use, and the group was fined thousands of dollars. Eddie's voice had also weakened after years of heavy chain smoking. By Christmas 1982, Otis Williams fired both David and Eddie from the group. It was the second and final time David was removed. That same year, David also faced tax trouble. He was fined $5,000 and sentenced to 6 months in a low-security prison in Terre Haute, Indiana, for failing to pay taxes from the mid-1970s. He served 4 months and was released early for good behavior. More legal issues followed. In 1986, he pleaded no contest over a small stolen property charge linked to a Colt handgun and paid fines and costs. In 1987, he spent a night in jail after a Detroit raid and was later found guilty of using cocaine. He received probation and community service. In 1989, after violating probation, he was ordered into rehab and completed a 28-day program at the Ariba Casriel Institute in New York. The voice was still there, but life around it was growing darker. And even when the stage gave him another chance, the old habits kept reaching for him. That was the sad pattern with David. Every time the door opened, something from the past walked in with him. The crowd still wanted the voice, but the people around him had to deal with the chaos that came with it. Otis learned the stage could not save everyone. David still found flashes of glory in the 1980s. He and Eddie Kendrick toured as a duo, and in 1985, they joined longtime fans Hall & Oates for the reopening of the Apollo Theater in New York. Their performance became a live album and single, and they also sang a medley of Temptations hits at Live Aid on July 13, 1985. John Oates even wrote a minor hit for Ruffin and Kendrick, though the two duos later fell out, reportedly because Daryl Hall objected to David's heavy drug use. In 1989, David was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with the other Temptations. He then toured and recorded with Eddie Kendrick and Dennis Edwards as Ruffin/Kendrick/Edwards, former leads of the Temptations. But Otis had his own pain too. His son, Otis Lamont Miles, died in a workplace accident in Detroit on August 8, 1985. He was only 24. Otis later said, performing helped him survive that grief. I was grieving because I lost my son, but when I got up on stage, I realized I was bringing people happiness, he said. He explained that whatever sorrow he had inside, he let it transfer into the audience having a wonderful time. That is how Otis kept going. He had been married more than once, had known family changes, and had already seen the cost of life on the road. His first marriage to Josephine Rogers ended in 1964. Later marriages to Ann Kane and Arliata Goldie Williams also became part of a life that was always moving. Yet the group remained his anchor. He said, "I've always taken negativity and turned it into a positive." That strength would matter, because more losses were coming, and one of them would bring David Ruffin back into Otis's memory in a painful way. Otis had already learned that success did not protect anyone from grief. The stage could lift you, but it could not save every brother, every friend, or every man who once stood beside you under the same lights. Otis saw David Ruffin fading before the end. By the end of the 1980s, David Ruffin's drug struggle had followed him for decades. He had first sought treatment in 1967, but the fight never really left. People around him could see what it was doing to him. His friend Linster Butch Merle later told the Philadelphia Inquirer, "He was getting high so much. The man was a walking skeleton." Daryl Hall also said David was hanging with a bad crew. And yet, no matter how far David fell, artists still respected the voice. Martha Reeves said, "Nobody could sing like David Ruffin." Daryl Hall called his sound a kind of glorious anguish. Rod Stewart said, hearing "I Wish It Would Rain" made the voice jump out of the speakers and ravish his soul. David himself never tried to make it sound complicated. He once said, "I don't know what kind of voice I have. I really don't," and explained that it was all about the feeling he got from the song. Otis saw David alive for the last time at a Las Vegas concert, only a few months before David's death. David came backstage after the show, and Otis later wrote that although he had known David as a drug user since the late 1960s, he did not remember ever seeing him look so bad. He said the drugs had left him looking sunken and emaciated. In that moment, Otis felt what no old friend wants to feel, that David's time was running out. That is why Otis's memories carry so much weight. He was not watching from the outside. He had seen the early dreams, the first big wins, the broken promises, and the moments when the music had to continue while someone inside the family was falling apart. Before the final headlines, there had been years of warnings and missed chances. Years later, Otis was still carrying the Temptations' name. In 2018, he said, "As long as my body holds up, I'm gonna ride the hell out of the horse." But behind that strength was a man who had outlived nearly every voice from the classic days. And when it came to David Ruffin, Otis was not just remembering a singer, he was remembering a warning. Was David Ruffin a man destroyed by his own choices? Or was he also a victim of the pressure that came with being Motown's most unforgettable voice? And do you think Otis Williams saved the Temptations by letting David go? Or lost a brother he could never truly replace? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more incredible stories from Hollywood's fascinating history. See you next time.